There is a land forged by a river and ruled by the sun. A civilization that defies time, speaking to us across 5,000 years through monuments of impossible scale and whispers from within the tomb. It is a landscape of profound dualities, the searing, lifeless expanse of the desert and the narrow, impossibly fertile ribbon of life that clings to the water's edge. The red land and the black land, death and life. This duality was not just geography. It was the engine of their entire worldview. This is Egypt. For most of us, the name conjures a handful of powerful, almost mythic images. The golden mask of a boy king, Tutankhamun, staring out with serene and unnerving stillness. The silent, bandaged figure of the mummy, a vessel of preservation, promising curses to those who disturb its eternal rest. The great Sphinx, half man, half lion, gazing enigmatically towards the horizon, as if it holds the answer to a question we have long forgotten how to ask. These are the icons, the surface of a mystery so deep it has captivated the world for centuries. But they are not the whole story. They are merely the cover of a book whose pages describe the very architecture of the universe. To truly read it, we must learn to see the world through their eyes. To understand ancient Egypt, we must look past the gold and the granite. We must learn to read their language, not just of hieroglyphs, but of belief. Because for the ancient Egyptians, mythology wasn't just a collection of entertaining stories about the gods told around a fire. It was something far more profound, far more essential. It was a technology of the soul, a divine instruction manual for living a meaningful life, for facing the terror of death, and for participating in the single most important task imaginable, ensuring that the sun would rise again tomorrow. This was not a religion you attended once a week. It was the very operating system of their civilization, a cosmic blueprint that dictated everything from the geometric precision of a farmer's field to the divine, universe-sustaining duties of the king. For over 3,000 years, a span of time so vast that the Roman Empire in its entirety could fit into just one of its periods, this system of belief guided them, sustained them, and gave them purpose. It gave them a stability unparalleled in human history. Our journey today is to uncover that blueprint, to go beyond the myths and into the mindset that created them. We will explore how they saw their world, their gods, and their place in the grand eternal cycle of creation. And to do that, we must begin not with a god or a pharaoh, but with a concept. A single, elegant, and all-important idea, personified as a goddess wearing a single ostrich feather in her hair. Her name was Mat. To the ancient Egyptians, the universe was not created into a state of placid perfection. It was born into a precarious state of existence, a constant, desperate struggle between two opposing forces. On one side, there was order, truth, balance, harmony, justice, and law. This was Mat. Mat was the fundamental reality of the cosmos, the underlying principle that held everything together. She was the force that made the sun follow its predictable path across the sky. That caused the Nile to flood its banks and retreat each year with life-giving precision. It held the stars in their constellations, and that bound society together in a network of reciprocal responsibility. To live in accordance with Mat was to be a true and righteous person, to be in tune with the very fabric of creation. It meant speaking truth, acting with fairness, and fulfilling one's role in the great cosmic play, no matter how small. Mat was the silent rhythm of the universe, and to live in harmony with it was the highest good. But Mat was perpetually under threat. Her opposite, her eternal shadow, was a force the Egyptians called Isfet. Isfet was chaos in all its forms. It was injustice, violence, lies, and decay. Isfet was the desert wind that buried fertile fields in sand, the unpredictable drought that brought famine, the foreign invader at the border, threatening to shatter the kingdom. It was the disease that swept through a village, the social unrest that tore a community apart, the tomb robber who desecrated a sacred space and destroyed a soul's chance at eternity. Isfet was the cosmic force of entropy, the constant nagging pressure trying to unravel the beautiful, ordered tapestry of creation and drag it back into the inert, featureless nothingness from which it came. The ultimate symbol of Isfet was a monstrous serpent of impossible size, a creature of pure malice named Apep, who lurked in the darkness of the underworld. His sole purpose was to attack the sun god each night, to swallow the light and plunge the world into eternal, cold blackness. This cosmic battle was not an abstract philosophy. For the Egyptians, it was a terrifyingly real daily struggle. Every single act, from the most humble to the most grand, was a weapon in the war against Isfet. When a farmer planted his crops in straight, orderly rows, he was creating a small island of mat in the world. When a judge delivered a fair verdict, he was reinforcing the foundations of cosmic law. When a priest lit incense and spoke the sacred words in a temple, he was actively, magically, helping the sun god defeat the serpent of chaos for one more night. The entire civilization was a collaborative project to keep the forces of darkness at bay. And at the very apex of this struggle, the linchpin holding the mortal and divine worlds together, stood the Pharaoh. The king of Egypt was not merely a ruler. He was the chief priest of every god, the living embodiment of the god Horus, and the single most important pillar supporting the structure of Mat on earth. His primary duty, above all else, was to maintain this divine balance. If the Pharaoh was just pious and performed the correct rituals at the correct times, Egypt would prosper. The Nile would flood, the harvests would be plentiful, and the borders would be secure. But if the king faltered, if he neglected his duties or ruled with injustice, he would weaken Mat, opening the door for Isfet to creep in, bringing famine, strife, and disaster upon the entire land. This fundamental concept, this cosmic tug-of-war between order and chaos, is the key that unlocks the entire Egyptian worldview. And it's what makes their mythology so profoundly different from the more familiar tales of their Mediterranean neighbors, the Greeks. When we think of Greek mythology, we think of drama, of personality. We picture a pantheon of gods on Mount Olympus who are, in many ways, superpowered, dysfunctional humans. They are driven by lust, jealousy, rage, and vanity. Zeus is a serial adulterer, Hera a vengeful wife, Ares a bloodthirsty warrior. Their stories are divine soap operas, exploring the heights and depths of emotion and personality. They interfere in human lives often on a whim, taking sides in the Trojan War because of a squabble over a golden apple. Their art reflects this. It is dynamic, emotional, celebrating the idealized, passionate human form. The Egyptian gods were, for the most part, something else entirely. They were less like characters and more like functions. They were personifications of the natural world and the forces that governed it. Re was not simply the god of the sun. He was the sun. Geb was not the god of the earth. He was the earth. Nut was the star-filled sky arched over him. Their actions were not about personal squabbles. They were about maintaining the universe. The central drama was not who was sleeping with whom, but the eternal, cyclical, and vital journey of Ah, the sun god. Every single day, he sailed his boat across the sky, bringing light and life. Every night, he descended into the terrifying underworld, the Duat, where he had to fight off the forces of Isfet to be reborn at dawn. The purpose of Egyptian myth and ritual was to understand this cosmic mechanism and to help ensure it never, ever stopped. The goal wasn't to psychoanalyze a deity's motivations, but to participate in their universe-sustaining work. So if this was their worldview, how do we know it? If there was no single, unified Bible, where did these stories come from? The answer is that their beliefs were not written down all at once, but were revealed in stages, in a series of sacred texts that evolved over thousands of years. These texts are our windows into the Egyptian soul, and each one shows us a different stage of their understanding of life, death, and the universe. Our knowledge begins where the Egyptian afterlife journey began for a king, inside the pyramid. These are the pyramid texts. Dating back to the Old Kingdom, over 4,400 years ago, they are the oldest religious writings known to humankind. Carved into the stone walls of the inner chambers of pyramids, they were a set of powerful, secret instructions intended for one person, and one person only, the dead pharaoh. They were not a book to be read, but a tool to be used. A collection of hundreds of magical spells, or utterances, designed to be a kind of spiritual engine. Their purpose was to blast the soul of the king out of his body, through the darkness of the tomb, and up into the sky. The tone of these texts is raw, primal, and astonishingly aggressive. The pharaoh does not humbly ask the gods for help. He commands them. He threatens them. He identifies himself with them, declaring, "The king is a great power, who has power over the powers." The king is a sacred image, the most sacred of the sacred images of the Great One. One famous utterance, known as the Cannibal Hymn, describes the king hunting, killing, and devouring the gods themselves in order to absorb their magic and knowledge for his own journey. He is the one, the text proclaims, who eats their magic, who swallows their spirits. Their great ones are for his morning meal, their middle ones for his evening meal. He has smashed the vertebrae and the spinal cords. He has taken out the hearts of the gods. This shocking imagery is not literal, but a fierce declaration of ultimate power. The king becomes a divine predator, storming the gates of heaven to claim his rightful place. The goal was simple and audacious: to transform the dead king into an Akh, a transfigured, effective spirit who would take his place among the imperishable stars in the northern sky, becoming a god in his own right. For the builders of the pyramids, this glorious afterlife was a privilege reserved exclusively for royalty. But nothing lasts forever, not even the Old Kingdom. After centuries of stability, Egypt collapsed into a period of civil war and disunity. This social upheaval led to a profound religious one. The idea that only the king could achieve a blessed afterlife began to crumble. Salvation was becoming democratized. This evolution is captured in our next set of documents, the Coffin Texts. Appearing in the Middle Kingdom, These texts were written primarily for wealthy officials and non-royal elites. And as the name suggests, they were often painted on the inside of their coffins, forming a protective, personalized barrier of magic around the deceased. The Coffin Texts inherited many spells from the pyramid texts, but the journey they describe is different. It's more complex, more perilous. The focus shifts from a violent ascent into the sky to a treacherous journey through the underworld, the Duat. For the first time, we see detailed maps of this dangerous realm, with its fiery lakes, demonic gatekeepers, and terrifying serpents. The deceased needed these texts to navigate the landscape and to know the secret names of the demons to pacify them. The afterlife was no longer a royal birthright to be seized, but a dangerous ordeal to be survived, an ordeal open to anyone who could afford the coffin and the spells to go with it. This trend of personalization and accessibility reaches its zenith in the New Kingdom with the most famous Egyptian funerary work of all. We call it the Book of the Dead, but the Egyptians knew it by a much more poetic and accurate name, the Chapters of Coming Forth by Day. This wasn't a single book in the modern sense, but a custom-made collection of spells written on a papyrus scroll, which was then rolled up and placed in the tomb with the deceased. Anyone with enough money could commission one, choosing the spells they felt would be most useful for their journey. It was the ultimate travel guide for the afterlife. It contained spells for every imaginable contingency, spells to allow the soul to leave the tomb and revisit the world of the living, spells to ensure you would have air to breathe and water to drink in the underworld, spells to protect you from being forced to walk upside down or eat filth, and spells to help you remember your own name, without which your identity would dissolve into nothingness. But most importantly, the Book of the Dead prepared the deceased for the final, terrifying climax of their journey, a moment of ultimate judgment on which their entire eternity depended, a scene that would be painted on tomb walls and papyri for over 1,000 years, the weighing of the heart. Here, in the Hall of Two Truths, the soul would have to declare its innocence, reciting a list of sins it had not committed, a negative confession. I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not lied. Then their heart, which the Egyptians believed was the seat of intelligence and conscience, was weighed against mats of feather of truth. If the heart was heavy with the burden of sin, of Isfet, it would tip the scales. The verdict would be guilty. The heart would be thrown to the monstrous beast, Kemet, the devourer of the dead, who would gobble it up. For the Egyptian, this was the most terrifying fate imaginable. Not a hell of eternal punishment, but something far worse, total and complete annihilation. To be unmade, to cease to exist. But if the deceased had lived a life in accordance with Ma'at, if their heart was light and pure, it would balance perfectly with the feather. The god Thoth would record the righteous verdict, and Horus would lead the soul, now declared true of voice, into the presence of the great god Osiris, the lord of the underworld, to be granted eternal life in the field of reeds, a perfect, idyllic version of the Egypt they had known. Mat and Isfet, order and chaos, a universe held in a delicate, eternal balance, a mythology not of mere stories, but of cosmic function, and a series of sacred texts that show us how the hope for an eternal life evolved from a fierce privilege of kings to a moral challenge for all. This is the framework. This is the lens through which we must view everything that is to come. With this cosmic order established, a question naturally arises. How did it all begin? How did the ancient Egyptians imagine that very first moment of creation, when the first god willed himself into being and pushed back against the infinite, silent, watery chaos of pre-existence to establish Maat for the very first time? That is where our story truly begins, in the dark waters of the Nun. Before the sun, before the sky, before the gods and the pharaohs, before time itself, there was nothing. And yet, it was not an empty nothing, not a sterile void. It was a nothing filled with potential, a pre-creation state of being. A dark, endless, watery abyss, silent and inert, containing the dissolved essence of everything that would ever be. The Egyptians called it the Nun. The Nun was the uncreation, the state of all things before they were things. It had no surface, no bottom, no direction. It was a cosmic soup of limitless potential, but without will, without consciousness, without form. It was both everything and nothing at once. For an eternity, it lay dormant. The universe was asleep, dreaming of itself in a deep, unbroken slumber. Then something happened, a stirring. In the absolute, crushing blackness of the Nun, a thought arose. A single, unprecedented event. Self-awareness. A consciousness that refused to remain dissolved in the infinite waters of non-being. This was Adam. His name means the complete one, or he who finishes. He was not created by any external force. He willed himself into being through the sheer power of his own consciousness. He was the universe's first thought, the first spark of order in the endless chaos. He was the answer to a question that had not yet been asked. He was the verb that turned potential into reality. In the stories of the priests at Heliopolis, the city of the sun, Adam's emergence was tied to a powerful physical image, something they saw every single year. After the great Nile flood inundated the land, turning the world back into a watery chaos reminiscent of the Nun, the waters would eventually recede, and the very first thing to appear would be a small mound of rich, black earth, the first promise of life's return. This primeval mound was the first solid place in all of creation. They called it the Benden. It was the anchor point of reality. And so it was that Adam, having thought himself into existence, stood upon the first land. But he was alone in the vast, silent darkness. The great project of creation, of pushing back the chaos of the Nun and establishing Maat, had begun, but he could not do it alone. He needed to create otherness, companionship, the raw materials of a world. From his own divine essence, he brought forth the first pair of gods. The texts describe this primal act in stark physical terms, sometimes as a powerful sneeze or cough, sometimes as an act of divine masturbation. This wasn't meant to be obscene. It was a metaphor for self-generation, for creating life from a single source without a partner, a concept of profound power. From his mouth, he spat forth a son, Shu, and he vomited a daughter, Tefnut. Shu was the god of air. He was the principle of dryness, the breath of life, the space that separates and defines. His sister wife, Tefnut, was the goddess of moisture. She was the life-giving dew, the wetness of the lungs, the binding force of condensation. But in the infinite darkness, they wandered off, becoming lost in the limitless expanse of the Nun. Adam, in a moment of the universe's first parental anxiety, sent his own eye out into the chaos to search for them. This eye was a powerful entity in its own right, a goddess of fierce, burning intensity. After a long search, the eye of Adam found his children and brought them back. Overwhelmed with relief, Adam wept tears of joy. And as these first divine tears struck the dark earth of the Benben, they transformed. From them, the first human beings were born. Humanity, in the Egyptian mind, was not an afterthought, but was born from the joy of God, forever linking them to the divine realm. Now the work could continue. The air and the moisture, Shu and Tefnut, came together and produced children of their own, a son, Geb, and a daughter, Nut. Geb was the earth itself, the solid ground beneath their feet, the source of minerals and plants. Nut was the sky. Her vast, star-covered body formed the canopy of the heavens. At first, they were locked in a passionate, inseparable embrace, so tight that there was no space between them. The world was a crush of potential, but it was stillborn, without light or room to breathe. So their father Shu, the god of air, performed his most crucial cosmic function. He stepped between them. With this forceful act of separation, the physical world was established. Geb, the earth, lay below. Nut, the sky, arched above. And Shu, the air, held them apart, creating the space for life to exist. This single, powerful image explained the very nature of reality for the Egyptians every single day. But Nut was already pregnant by Geb, and her own grandfather, the great creator Adam-Ra, for Adam had by now merged with the power of the sun, was furious at their unsanctioned union. He decreed that Nut would not be allowed to give birth on any day of the 360-day calendar year. This was a terrible curse, condemning her children to remain unborn forever. In despair, Nut turned to the clever god Thoth, the master of knowledge, magic, and measure. Thoth, ever the strategist, devised a plan. He went to the moon god, Khonsu, and challenged him to a game of Senate, a game of strategy and chance. Thoth gambled for a fraction of the moon's light, and he won. He won enough light 1/72 of it to create 5 new days, adding them to the end of the year. These days were outside the original 360-day calendar, and thus outside of Ra's curse. And on these 5 epigomenal days, outside of ordinary time, Nut was able to give birth to her 4 children, the gods who would drive the central drama of Egyptian mythology. On the first day, Osiris was born, and a voice was said to have boomed across creation, proclaiming the arrival of the Lord of all. He was noble, beautiful, and destined to be the first king of the earth, a teacher of agriculture and law. He was the embodiment of benevolent order. On the second day, his sister Isis was born. She was brilliant, a mistress of magic, fiercely intelligent and loyal, born with the knowledge of 1,000 spells. Her power would one day rival that of the creator god himself. On the third day, Set was born. He was not born in the proper way, but violently tore himself from his mother's womb, a brutal act that was an omen of his character. He was the god of the harsh desert, of foreign lands, of chaos, envy, and brutal strength. And on the 4th day, Nephthys was born, an enigmatic goddess, the twin sister of Isis. She was a protective deity of the dead, yet forever linked to the chaotic nature of her husband Set. This was the Ennead of Heliopolis, the 9 great gods who formed the foundation of the cosmos. Atum the creator, his children Shu and Tefnut, their children Geb and Nut, and their children Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Creation was complete. The stage was set. Mat had been established. Now it had to be defended, and that defense was the sacred duty of the king. The Pharaoh of Egypt was more than a man. He was a bridge between the human and the divine, the mortal incarnation of a god. This was not just propaganda. It was fundamental theology. The living king was the embodiment of Horus, the powerful falcon-headed son of Isis and Osiris, the rightful heir to the throne. When that king died, his soul would merge with Osiris, the lord of the underworld, and he would become the god of the dead. Immediately, the divine essence of Horus would pass into the next pharaoh, the son and successor. This created an unbroken chain of divinity stretching back to the beginning of time. The man who held the throne was mortal, but the office of kingship itself was eternal. This belief gave the Egyptian state a terrifying stability. To rebel against the pharaoh was not just treason, it was blasphemy. It was an act of Isfet, an attempt to unravel the divine order itself. The king's entire life was a series of rituals designed to uphold Mat. He was, in theory, the high priest of every temple in the land, and every offering made by a priest was made in his name. His public appearances were carefully staged religious dramas. One of the most important was the Set festival, or Royal Jubilee, celebrated after 30 years of rule. This was not a simple anniversary party. It was a complex series of rituals designed to magically rejuvenate the aging king, to prove his physical fitness, and to renew his divine power, thereby renewing the vitality of the entire nation. He would run a ritual course, demonstrating his strength, and then raise the Jed pillar, a symbol of Osiris's backbone, representing the triumph of stability over chaos. He would be recrowned, his contract with the gods renewed for another term. Nowhere is this fusion of kingship, divinity, and the quest for eternal order more tangible than in the necropolis of Saqqara. Here, around 2650 BCE, during the Third Dynasty, a king named Djoser and his brilliant vizier, a man named Imhotep, would spark an architectural revolution. It would change the world forever. Before Djoser, kings were buried in mastaba's single-story, rectangular structures of mud brick built over an underground burial chamber. They were impressive but earthly. Imhotep, a high priest, a physician, a sage who would later be deified himself, had a far grander vision. He decided to build his king's tomb not from mud brick, but from stone, a material of eternity. This was a monumental leap, requiring the organization of a massive workforce and the invention of new techniques for quarrying and transport. He built a mastaba, then another, smaller one on top, and another, and another, and another, until he had created a towering, six-step monument, a literal stairway to heaven. The step pyramid was not just a bigger tomb. It was a new theology rendered in stone. It was a machine designed to propel the king's soul upwards, to help him ascend to the northern stars. The entire complex around it was a stone replica of the king's royal palace, a stage set where his spirit could continue to perform the rituals of kingship, like the Set festival, for all eternity. It was a declaration that the power of the pharaoh would not be stopped by death. This audacious idea unleashed a century of frantic innovation, ambition, and even failure. The kings of the Fourth Dynasty were obsessed with perfecting Imhotep's vision. King Sneferu, the father of the builder of the Great Pyramid, was the most prolific of all. At the site of Medum, his architects attempted to convert an existing step pyramid into a true smooth-sided pyramid. They failed. The outer casing collapsed, leaving the ruined core we see today. Undeterred, Snefru moved to Dashur and began again. His architects started a new pyramid at a steep, ambitious angle of 54 degrees. But partway through construction, the stresses proved too great. Cracks appeared in the internal chambers. Fearing another collapse, they were forced to drastically change the angle to a much safer 43 degrees. The result is the unique and beautiful bent pyramid, an accidental monument to the limits of engineering and the willingness to adapt. Learning from their mistakes, they started a third pyramid nearby, the Red Pyramid. This time, they used the gentler 43-degree angle from the start. It was a success. It became the world's first true, smooth-sided pyramid. All of this experimentation, all of this striving, culminated here at Giza. Snefru's son, Khufu, took the lessons learned by his father and unleashed the full power of the Egyptian state to create the most massive and most perfect pyramid of all, the Great Pyramid of Giza. For over 3,800 years, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth. It is composed of 2.3 million blocks of stone, some weighing up to 80 tons, fitted together with a precision that modern engineers still marvel at. It is aligned to the cardinal points with an accuracy of within 1/15 of a single degree. This was not just a pile of rocks. This was math made manifest. It was order, geometry, and stability on a superhuman scale. It was a man-made mountain of stone, a permanent, unshakable Bendan mound for the king's eternal life. Like Djoser's pyramid, it was a resurrection machine, but its technology was more refined. The so-called air shafts in the king's chamber were not for ventilation. They were precisely angled star shafts, spiritual launch tubes aimed at specific constellations tied to the king's destiny, one towards Orion, who the Egyptians identified with Osiris, and the other towards the circumpolar stars, the imperishables, who never set below the horizon. The pyramid was the hardware, and deep inside, carved on the walls of later pyramids, like that of Unes, was the software, the pyramid texts, the magical utterances that would power the king's final, violent ascent into the heavens. The Old Kingdom was the age of the God King, a time of supreme confidence and centralized power. They built these monuments not as symbols of their vanity, but as engines of cosmic stability. By ensuring the king's successful journey to the afterlife, by transforming him into a god who would help govern the cosmos, they believed they were ensuring the continuation of Mat for everyone. They were building for eternity because they believed their world depended on it. But this absolute certainty, this perfect fusion of God and king, could not last. A different kind of journey was waiting, one that would take place not in the sky, but in the terrifying darkness below the earth. For centuries, it must have seemed as though the world of the god kings would last forever. The pyramids stood as unshakable mountains, testaments to a supreme centralized power and a divine contract that seemed unbreakable. The Pharaoh, the living Horus, was the single pillar holding up the sky, the guarantor of Matet. His successful journey to the stars was the engine that powered the entire cosmos. But no mountain is immune to the erosion of time, and no pillar can stand when its foundation crumbles. Around 2181 BCE, the seemingly eternal stability of the Old Kingdom collapsed. The reasons are complex: a perfect storm of political and environmental disaster, a series of low Nile floods led to widespread famine, shaking the people's faith in a king who was supposed to guarantee nature's bounty. The immense cost of pyramid building drained the royal treasury, and provincial governors, far from the capital, grew powerful and ambitious, beginning to rule their own territories as petty kings. The central government dissolved. Egypt spiraled into a century of civil war, poverty, and chaos. This was the first intermediate period. It was an age of profound anxiety, a time when Isfet, the serpent of chaos, seemed to have won. The psychological shock was immense. The literature from this period is filled with a deep pessimism, a sense that the world had been turned upside down. One sage lamented, "The river is blood. Laughter has perished. The land is full of gangs, and a man goes to plow with his shield." This was a world where Maat had failed. If the divine Pharaoh could not hold the country together, what did his divinity mean? If the state could no longer guarantee order in this life, how could it possibly guarantee a glorious eternity in the next? The old certainties were washed away in a tide of doubt and fear. The aggressive, confident magic of the pyramid texts, designed to blast a king into the heavens, felt hollow in a world where tombs were being robbed and society was falling apart. In this vacuum of belief, this age of anxiety, the Egyptian people turned away from the distant, cosmic state gods like Re and towards a deity who understood their suffering. A god who had known betrayal, who had been murdered, who had felt pain, and who had, against all odds, returned from the dead. They turned to Osiris. The myth of Osiris, once a story tied to the eternal cycle of kingship, now took on a powerful new meaning. He wasn't a remote falcon god in the sky or an impersonal sun disk, sailing across the heavens, the very gods who seemed to have abandoned Egypt. He was a king who had been drowned by his jealous brother, a body that had been dismembered and scattered, a victim of the ultimate act of Isfet. His story was a mirror for the fractured state of Egypt itself. But crucially, his story did not end in defeat. Thanks to the devotion and powerful magic of his wife, Isis, who painstakingly searched for every piece of his broken body, he was made whole again. He was resurrected. This story of resurrection became the single most powerful source of hope in a hopeless time. If Osiris, the god who had suffered, could triumph over death, then perhaps they could too. His personal victory became a universal promise. He became not just the king of the underworld, but a personal savior. His cult grew not from royal decree, but from the hearts of the people, a grassroots spiritual movement. And his kingdom, the Duat, once a terrifying realm to be bypassed by the king on his way to the stars, was transformed. It was still dangerous, but it was now also the path to salvation. This led to one of the most profound revolutions in religious history, the democratization of the afterlife. The celestial paradise of the pyramid builders, reserved for the king alone, was largely abandoned. The new destination was the field of reeds, the Aru, a perfect idyllic version of Egypt within the realm of Osiris. Here, the barley grew 7 cubits tall, the fruit was always ripe, and the canals were always full. It was a paradise of eternal abundance, free from sickness, sorrow, and even work-small magical figurines called shabdis would be placed in the tomb to answer the call to labor in the deceased's place. And the path to this paradise was now open to anyone, not just to kings, but to governors, to scribes, to artisans, to anyone who could afford a proper burial and knew the secret password to eternity. The afterlife was no longer a state-sponsored project. It had become a personal quest. But this journey was not for the faint of heart. Duat, the Egyptian underworld, was a complex and terrifying place. It was conceived as a realm that the sun god Ra traveled through during the 12 hours of the night, and the soul of the deceased had to make the same journey. Each hour was a distinct region with its own landscape, its own challenges, and its own demonic gatekeepers. There were rivers of fire to cross, lakes of boiling water to navigate. There were gods with the heads of knives, serpents with legs, and fearsome guardians who would only let you pass if you could address them by their secret magical names. "I will not let you pass over me," one gatekeeper declares in a text, "unless you tell me my name." The correct answer was Heart of Osiris. Knowing these names gave the deceased power over the demons. It was a journey that tested not just your moral purity, but your magical knowledge. Failure meant the ultimate horror. The second death, complete annihilation, to be devoured by monsters and cease to exist forever. And so, a new set of guidebooks was required, a new spiritual technology for this new, more dangerous journey. These are the Coffin Texts. Appearing in the Middle Kingdom, these texts were the successors to the Pyramid Texts, but they were adapted for a new audience and a new destination. Written primarily for wealthy officials and the emerging middle class, they were painted directly onto the interior surfaces of their coffins. This was an act of immense magical significance. The coffin became a microcosm of the universe, and the texts formed a protective, personalized barrier of magic around the deceased. The lid was often painted with the image of the sky goddess Nut, arching protectively over the mummy. The floor could contain the map of the underworld. Lying in their tomb, the dead person was literally wrapped in the words that would save them. The coffin was no longer just a box. It was a vehicle, a vessel that would carry them through the treacherous waters of the Duat. The Coffin Texts contain hundreds of spells, many inherited from the Pyramid Texts, but now repurposed for a non-royal individual. But they also contain crucial innovations. The most important of these were the first detailed maps of the underworld, guides like the Book of Two Ways. Painted on the floor of the coffin, this map showed two paths, one by land, one by water, that the soul could take to bypass a terrifying lake of fire and reach the realm of Osiris. It was a literal roadmap to paradise, complete with warnings about dangerous areas and the spells needed to overcome specific obstacles. Other spells provided the deceased with the power of transformation, a crucial survival skill. Spell 295 allowed the soul to turn into a falcon to fly past dangers. Another allowed them to become a crocodile, to swim safely through treacherous waters. One could even become a lotus flower, to be reborn with the sun each morning. The goal was to be adaptable, to have a tool for every possible contingency in this hostile spirit world. You are not a passive soul, hoping for salvation. You were an active magician, armed with the knowledge to shape your own destiny. And at the heart of it all was the direct identification with the Savior God. In the Coffin Texts, the deceased boldly declares, "I am Osiris." This was the ultimate magical statement. It was not merely a prayer or a hope. In the Egyptian worldview, to speak something, especially in a ritual context, was to make it real. By identifying with the resurrected God, the individual hoped to share in his triumph over death. They were no longer just a follower of Osiris. Through magic, they were becoming Osiris. Spell 1130 makes this crystal clear. "O you who are in the egg," the deceased proclaims, referring to their own coffin, "I am Horus Osiris, has been given his heart, he will not die the second death. This was the new model of salvation. In the Old Kingdom, the system was top-down. The king ascended to the heavens, and through his divine power, he pulled the entire nation up with him, ensuring the stability of Mat for all. In the Middle Kingdom, the system was bottom-up. It was now the individual's responsibility to live a moral life, to prepare for their journey, and to arm themselves with the necessary ritual knowledge. Eternity was something you had to earn, not something the state provided. A new spiritual economy emerged, where scribes who could write the texts and artisans who could craft the coffins became indispensable guides to the afterlife for a whole new class of people. The collapse of political order had forced a spiritual re-evaluation. The Egyptians had looked into the abyss of chaos and found a new kind of faith. It was a faith centered not on the unshakable power of a god-king, but on the hope of personal resurrection. It was a belief that even in the darkest of times, through suffering and death, a new life was possible. This period of turmoil, paradoxically, created a more personal, more resilient, and ultimately more profound religious system, one that planted the seeds for the moral judgments and elaborate afterlife beliefs that would define Egypt's golden age. This profound shift laid the groundwork for the era that was to come. The beliefs and spells of the Coffin Texts would evolve, becoming more refined, more elaborate, and available to even more people. They would form the basis for the most famous religious document in Egyptian history, the ultimate guide to the afterlife, a scroll that promised not just survival, but the power to come forth by day. The period of introspection and fragmentation would not last. History, like the Nile, moves in cycles of retreat and return. After a second period of foreign rule by a people known as the Hyksos, humiliating occupation that saw outsiders controlling the sacred land of the Nile Delta, a series of warrior pharaohs from the southern city of Thebes rose up, expelled the invaders, and forged a new, unified Egypt. But they did not stop at their borders. Driven by a fierce new nationalism and a desire for security, these pharaohs became conquerors. This was the birth of the New Kingdom, around 1550 BCE. It was an age of empire, of unprecedented wealth, and of military might. Gold poured in from the mines of Nubia. Tribute flowed from vassal states in Syria and Palestine. Thebes became the richest and most powerful city on earth. And this new imperial confidence demanded a new imperial theology to match. In the Old Kingdom, the primary state god was Ra of Heliopolis. In the Middle Kingdom, the hearts of the people had turned to Osiris of Abydos. Now, in the New Kingdom, the local god of the victorious Theban pharaohs was elevated to a position of supreme power. His name was Amun, the Hidden One. Originally an obscure god of the air, Amun was now merged with the traditional ancient sun god Ra. He became Amun-Ra. This was a masterful act of political theology. It honored the ancient traditions of sun worship while firmly establishing the supremacy of the new Theban dynasty. Amun-Ra was not just the creator god. He was the king of the gods, the divine father of the pharaoh, and the patron of the empire. The spoils of war were dedicated to him, and his temple at Karnak grew into the largest religious complex the world has ever known. A city of gods built by generations of pharaohs, each one trying to outdo the last. The priesthood of Amun-Ra became fantastically wealthy and powerful, a state within a state that would one day challenge the pharaoh himself. But while the state religions celebrated the imperial glory of Amun-Ra, the personal religion of the afterlife centered on Osiris, continued its evolution. The anxieties and hopes of the Middle Kingdom had not disappeared. They had matured. The spells and maps of the Coffin Texts, once the preserve of the wealthy elite, were now refined, standardized, and made even more accessible. They moved from the cramped interior of the coffin to a new, more versatile medium, the papyrus scroll. This collection of spells and images is the most famous work of Egyptian literature. We call it the Book of the Dead. But this is a modern misnomer, invented by 19th century grave robbers who found these scrolls buried with the mummies. The Egyptians knew it by a much more beautiful and accurate name, the Chapters of Coming Forth by Day. This name reveals the book's true purpose. It was not a book about being dead. It was a manual for overcoming death. The goal was to come forth by day, to allow the spirit of the deceased to leave the dark tomb and enjoy the light, to revisit their favorite places, to receive offerings, and to travel with the sun god in his boat. This was enabled by the Egyptian concept of the soul, which was made of many parts. The K was the life force, a spiritual double that remained in the tomb and needed the food offerings to survive. The Ba, depicted as a human-headed bird, was the individual's unique personality, which could travel between the tomb and the outside world. The ultimate goal was for the Ba and Ka to reunite each night and transform into the Ak, a transfigured, effective spirit dwelling among the gods. The Book of the Dead was the magical key to ensuring this process worked. A wealthy Egyptian could commission a personalized scroll from a temple workshop, choosing from nearly 200 available spells, or chapters. There were spells for everything. Chapter 64 promised to give the deceased knowledge of all the secret things of the underworld. Chapter 23 was the spell for opening the mouth of the deceased, a crucial ritual that magically reanimated the mummy's senses, allowing it to speak, eat, and breathe again. There were spells to ensure you wouldn't have to eat filth, spells to prevent your head from being cut off, and even a spell to stop you from forgetting your own name. A terrifying prospect, as to be nameless was to cease to exist. But woven throughout these magical texts was a new and powerful emphasis on morality. The journey through the Duat was no longer just a test of ritual knowledge. It was a test of character. And this test reached its climax in the most dramatic scene in all of Egyptian mythology, a moment of ultimate judgment, the weighing of the heart. The soul arrives in the hall of two truths, a place of perfect balance and divine justice. Here, before a tribunal of 42 divine judges, each one representing a different sin, the deceased must make their case. They recite the negative confession, a powerful declaration of innocence that gives us an unparalleled insight into the Egyptian moral code. I have not committed sin, they declare. I have not committed robbery with violence. I have not stolen. I have not slain men and women. I have not made light the bushel. I have not acted deceitfully. I have not uttered lies. I have not been an eavesdropper. I have not been a man of anger. I have not polluted the water. This was a comprehensive morality, encompassing everything from theft and murder to honesty in business, social harmony, and even environmental responsibility. Then comes the moment of truth. The scales begin to move. The ibis-headed god Thoth, the divine scribe, the Lord of knowledge, stands ready with his palette to record the result. Crouching nearby, tense and hungry, is the monstrous creature Ammit, the devourer of the dead, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, a terrifying combination of the three animals most feared by the Egyptians. She is the embodiment of the second death. If the heart was heavy with the burden of sin of Isfet, it would tip the scales. The verdict would be guilty. Thoth would record the damnation. The heart would be thrown to Ammit, who would gobble it up in one horrific gulp. For the Egyptian, this was the most terrifying fate imaginable. Not an eternity in a fiery hell, but something far worse. Total and complete annihilation. To be unmade. To cease to exist, your name erased from memory, your soul dissolved back into the chaos from which the world arose. But if the deceased had lived a life in accordance with Ma'at, if their heart was light and pure, it would balance perfectly with the feather. The scales would hold steady. Thoth would joyfully record the righteous verdict. The deceased would be declared Ma-Keru, true of voice, and the god Horus would lead them into the presence of the great god Osiris, to be granted eternal life in the field of reeds. This sophisticated, personal vision of the afterlife existed alongside the grand state cult of Amun-Ra. And just as the beliefs had evolved, so too did the architecture of death for the pharaohs. The age of the pyramid was over. The great pyramids of the Old Kingdom were magnificent, but they were also giant, unmissable advertisements for tomb robbers. Despite their secret entrances and complex internal passages, nearly all of them were plundered in antiquity. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom learned from this. They chose a new strategy: concealment. They moved their royal cemetery here, to this remote, desolate valley on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, a place they called Ta-Izit Mayat, the place of truth. We know it as the Valley of the Kings. Instead of building up towards the sky, they tunneled down into the earth, cutting deep, hidden corridors and chambers into the limestone cliffs. The entrances were sealed and disguised, hoping to protect the king's body and his fabulous treasures for eternity. But the inside of these tombs is where the true magic lies. The walls are no longer sparsely decorated. They are a complete, illustrated copy of the sacred underworld books. Here we find the Amduat, the book of what is in the underworld, a detailed hour-by-hour guide to the sun god's nightly journey. Here is the Book of Gates, depicting the massive gates and fearsome guardians the king must pass. And here, of course, are chapters from the Book of the Dead. The tomb itself had become the sacred text. It was a resurrection machine, just like the pyramids, but one that worked through inscribed knowledge rather than structural alignment. As the king's funeral procession carried his sarcophagus deep into the tomb, they were symbolically carrying him through the hours of the night. When he was laid to rest in the burial chamber, the Hall of Gold, he was placed at the point of resurrection, ready to merge with Osiris and be reborn with the sun god in the morning. The New Kingdom was an age of dualities, a powerful, imperial state cult coexisting with a deeply personal, moralized, and accessible vision of the afterlife. It was the high point of Egyptian civilization, where immense power and wealth created a golden age of art, architecture, and religious thought, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and inspire us to this day. We have explored the framework of the Egyptian cosmos, the eternal struggle between order and chaos. We have traced how the hope for an afterlife evolved over thousands of years. But to truly understand the heart of Egypt, we must now turn to the stories themselves. These were not just tales for entertainment. They were living myths, sacred dramas that explained the most profound mysteries of existence. The nature of kingship, the tragedy of death, the promise of rebirth, and the relentless cycle of time itself. At the very center of this mythological world stand three great cycles, three epic stories that intertwine to form the spiritual bedrock of the civilization. The first is a story of family, betrayal, and love so powerful it could conquer death itself. This is the myth of Osiris. When creation was young, the gods still walked the earth, and the first king to rule over humanity was Osiris. He was a perfect king, the very embodiment of Maat in living form. He gathered the wandering, savage people and gave them the gifts of civilization. He abolished cannibalism, taught them how to cultivate wheat and barley, how to press grapes for wine, and brew grain for beer. His wife, the brilliant Isis, taught them to weave linen, to heal the sick, and establish the sacred institution of marriage. Under their rule, the world experienced a golden age. The land was peaceful, the harvests were plentiful, and humanity was happy. But Osiris had a brother Set, and where Osiris was the embodiment of order, civilization, and the fertile black land of the Nile Valley, Set was the incarnation of the opposite. He was the god of the harsh, red desert that encroached on the valley, a place of sterility, thirst, and death. He was the god of violent storms, of foreign lands beyond Egypt's ordered borders, and of brutal, untamed strength. And he looked upon his brother's success, not just with jealousy, but with a deep philosophical opposition. He coveted the throne, and he began to plot, seeking to replace his brother's ordered world with his own chaotic dominion. Set's plan was one of cunning deception. He secretly obtained the exact measurements of his brother's body and commissioned a magnificent chest to be made from the finest cedar, inlaid with gold and precious stones, perfectly tailored to fit Osiris. He then threw a great feast, a lavish banquet meant to lull his brother into a false sense of security. He invited Osiris and 72 co-conspirators. At the height of the festivities, when wine had flowed freely and spirits were high, Set had the beautiful chest brought into the hall. "Behold," he announced, "this magnificent chest I will give as a gift to whichever one of you fits inside it most perfectly." One by one, the guests tried, laughing as they failed. They were too tall, too short, too wide. Finally, it was Osiris's turn. Unsuspecting and admiring the fine craftsmanship, he lay down inside the chest. It was a perfect fit. In an instant, the celebration turned into a scene of horror. Before anyone could react, Set and his followers seized the chest, which had now become a coffin. They carried it to the banks of the Nile and flung it into the river. The great King Osiris, the Lord of life and civilization, was drowned, betrayed by his own brother. The chest floated down the Nile, out into the Mediterranean Sea, and eventually washed ashore in the distant land of Byblos, in modern-day Lebanon. There, a sacred tamarisk tree grew around the chest, miraculously absorbing it, encasing the body of the dead god within its trunk. When news of this monstrous act of Isfet reached Isis, her grief was boundless, but her grief quickly turned to resolve. Isis was not just a grieving widow. She was a goddess of formidable magic and unwavering devotion. She refused to accept her husband's fate. She set out on a desperate search, wandering the earth, questioning everyone she met, following the faintest of rumors. Her journey eventually led her to Byblos, where she discovered the tamarisk tree, now a mighty pillar in the local king's palace. Through her magic and wisdom, she retrieved the pillar, opened it, and reclaimed the body of her beloved husband. She brought Osiris back to Egypt, hiding his body in the thick marshes of the Nile Delta. intending to use her magic to revive him. But Set, out hunting in the marshes, discovered the hidden body. His rage knew no bounds. To ensure his brother could never be made whole again, he took the body of Osiris and hacked it into 14 pieces, scattering them across the length and breadth of Egypt. This was the ultimate act of desecration, an attempt to annihilate Osiris forever. But Set underestimated the power of Isis. Once more, the goddess set out on her grim pilgrimage. With her sister Nephthys, she sailed the Nile, searching every province, every swamp, every island. One by one, she found the pieces of her husband. And where she found each piece, she established a temple. This act magically began to knit the land of Egypt, which had been fractured by the death of its king, back together again. Finally, she had found all but one piece, the phallus, which had been eaten by a fish in the Nile. Undeterred, Isis fashioned a replacement out of gold and magic. With the help of Anubis, the god of embalming, she painstakingly reassembled the body of her husband, wrapping him in linen bandages. In this act, she created the first mummy. Then, breathing life back into his body with her magic and the beating of her wings, she briefly resurrected him long enough to conceive a son and heir, Horus. His duty done, Osiris could not remain in the land of the living. He descended into the underworld to become its just and eternal king. His story became the blueprint for every Egyptian. It symbolized the victory of life over death, of order over chaos. It mirrored the annual cycle of the Nile, which flooded, died, back, and then brought new life to the land. And it offered the promise that anyone, through identification with Osiris and proper ritual, could be reassembled, resurrected, and reborn into a perfect afterlife. The son of Isis and Osiris was raised in secret, hidden from the murderous eyes of his uncle Set. He was the rightful heir to the throne of Egypt, the embodiment of Mat's legitimate succession. When he came of age, he stepped forward to challenge the usurper. Thus began the second great mythological cycle, the contendings of Horus and Set. This was not a short battle. It was a long, brutal, and often bizarre conflict that lasted for 80 years, judged by a tribunal of the gods, presided over by the Creator himself. It was a cosmic court case to determine who had the rightful claim to rule. The contests were violent and strange. They fought as hippos, a battle Isis interrupted with her magic, angering both contestants. They engaged in treacherous magical duels. In one famous episode, Set assaults Horus, who then captures Set's semen and Han, on the advice of his mother Isis, puts it on some lettuce Set's favorite food. When Set eats the lettuce, Horus's seed enters his body. In the divine court, when Set boasts of his dominance over Horus, Horus calls for his seed to answer from within Set, humiliating the god of chaos and proving his own superiority. The struggle was vicious. In one battle, Set tore out Horus's left eye, the moon, but the god Thoth healed it, creating the powerful magical symbol known as the Wajit Eye, the Eye of Horus, a symbol of healing, protection, and restoration. In turn, Horus injured Set's testicles, symbolizing the chaotic god's sterility and inability to produce a legitimate heir. Finally, after 80 years of struggle, the gods ruled in favor of Horus. He was declared the rightful king. Set was forced to concede and was given dominion over the wild desert lands and foreign territories. His chaotic energy contained at the borders of Egypt. The triumph of Horus was the ultimate victory of Mat over Isfet, It established the divine principle that the rightful heir, the son, would always succeed the father. Every pharaoh who ever sat on the throne of Egypt was the living embodiment of Horus, the one who had defeated chaos and restored order to the world. While the stories of Osiris and Horus were foundational dramas that happened in the mythological past, the third great cycle was a drama that unfolded every single day. It was the most immediate, most vital, and most relentless of all the myths, the eternal journey of the sun god, Ra. For the Egyptians, the rising and setting of the sun was no mere astronomical event. It was a daily cycle of birth, death, and resurrection that powered the entire universe. Each morning, Ra was born anew on the eastern horizon, and he boarded his magnificent day boat, the Manjit. Throughout the 12 hours of the day, he sailed across the sky, his light bringing life and warmth to the world. But at sunset, a moment of great anxiety, Ra did not simply disappear. He descended into the underworld, the Duat, and boarded his night boat, the Mesektet. This began the most dangerous part of his journey. For the 12 hours of the night, he had to travel through the perilous regions of the underworld, bringing light and hope to the dead. In the deepest hour of the night, he would merge with Osiris, the king of the dead. In this moment, Re and Osiris, the gods of life and death, became one. It was a moment of profound cosmic regeneration. Ra, the living soul, united with Osiris, the dead body, and from this union, both were revitalized. But this journey was not unopposed. Lurking in the darkest waters of the Duat was his mortal enemy, the ultimate embodiment of Isfet, the great serpent, Apep. Apep's goal was simple and terrible: to swallow the sunboat and its divine crew, to stop the sun's journey, and to return the universe to the limitless, lifeless darkness of the Nun. Every night, Apep would attack, and every night, the gods who crewed the solar bark had to fight him off. The battle was fierce. The prayers and rituals performed by priests in the temples all over Egypt were believed to magically strengthen Ra and weaken the serpent. Even the chaotic god Set played a crucial role. Standing at the prow of the boat, he would use his immense strength to spear the great serpent, repelling him for another night. The victory of Ra over Apep was never permanent. It had to be won again, every single night. His successful emergence from the underworld at dawn was a moment of triumph for all of creation. It was the proof that Mat had once again triumphed over Isfet, that order had conquered chaos, and that life would continue for one more day. This daily, reliable cycle was the most powerful symbol of all, the ultimate guarantee of cosmic stability, and the divine engine that drove all of Egyptian civilization. No empire lasts forever. No golden age can hold back the relentless march of time. For 1,000 years, the new kingdom had projected an image of invincible power, but by the first millennium BCE, its strength began to wane. Internal struggles between the pharaoh and the powerful priesthood of Amun weakened the state. A series of invasions chipped away at its borders and its confidence. The world was changing, and new, aggressive empires were rising in the east. The final blow to Egyptian independence came not from the deserts of Asia, but from across the Mediterranean Sea. In 332 BCE, a new conqueror swept across the world, a man who saw himself as a new Achilles, Alexander the Great. He took Egypt without a fight. He was crowned pharaoh, honored the traditional gods, and founded a great new city on the coast, Alexandria. When Alexander died, his vast empire was carved up among his generals. Egypt fell to Ptolemy, who established a new dynasty of Greek rulers that would last for 300 years. This was the Ptolemaic period, an age not of Egyptian pharaohs, but of Greek kings who ruled from Alexandria, a beacon of Hellenistic culture and learning. It was an age of profound cultural collision and fusion. The Ptolemies were clever rulers. They understood that to control Egypt, they needed to be seen as legitimate pharaohs, but they also needed to cater to the thousands of Greek soldiers and administrators who now lived there. Their solution was syncretism, the deliberate blending of gods and beliefs. The most famous product of this policy was a new god, Serapis. He was an artificial deity crafted by a committee of priests and theologians to appeal to both Egyptians and Greeks. His name was a fusion of Osiris and Apis, the sacred bull of Memphis, two of Egypt's most important funerary deities. But his appearance was entirely Greek. He was depicted not as a mummy, but as a majestic, bearded god resembling Zeus or Hades, the king of the Greek underworld. He wore a modius, a grain basket, on his head, symbolizing abundance. Serapis was a god for a new multicultural world, and his massive temple in Alexandria, the Serapeum, became one of the wonders of the ancient world. But while Serapis was a state-sponsored project, another Egyptian deity conquered the hearts of the people on her own terms. This was Isis. In this new, uncertain world, her story of fierce loyalty, maternal love, and magical power had universal appeal. She was no longer just the wife of Osiris. She became a supreme, all-encompassing goddess. The Greeks identified her with their own goddesses. She had the beauty of Aphrodite, the maternal devotion of Demeter, the regal power of Hera. The cult of Isis spread like wildfire across the Ramon world. From a local Egyptian goddess, she transformed into a universal savior. Her worship became a mystery religion, offering initiates a personal relationship with the divine, a promise of spiritual guidance in this life, and, through her power over death, the hope of a blessed afterlife. For a Roman citizen living in a bustling, chaotic city, the idea of a compassionate, loving mother goddess who had suffered and understood human pain was a powerful comfort. Temples to Isis were built from Britain to the Black Sea. She was, for a time, the most popular goddess in the Western world. The rule of the Ptolemies ended with its most famous figure, Cleopatra VII. Her defeat at the hands of Octavian, soon to be the Emperor Augustus, marked the end of Egyptian independence. In 30 BCE, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire, the personal breadbasket of the emperor. For a time, the old ways continued. Roman emperors were depicted as pharaohs on temple walls, making offerings to the gods to ensure the stability of this vital province. But the heart had gone out of it. The divine spark of kingship, passed down from Horus for 3,000 years, had been extinguished. The pharaoh was now a distant politician in Rome, and Egypt was just another part of a vast, impersonal empire. Then, a new faith arrived from the province of Judea. It spoke of a single, all-powerful God and of his Son, who had been executed and resurrected, promising eternal life to all who believed. This was Christianity. At first, it was just one of many strange new cults in the teeming cities of the Roman Empire. But it had a power and an exclusivity that the old religions lacked. It offered a direct path to salvation, a strong sense of community, and a message of hope that resonated deeply with the poor and the powerless. And unlike the tolerant polytheism of the past, this new faith was monotheistic. Its God was a jealous God who demanded total devotion. There was no room for Amun-Ra Osiris or the magic of Isis. To the fervent Christian, these were not gods. They were demons. The conflict was inevitable. As Christianity grew, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. The tolerance of the past was replaced by persecution. In 391 CE, the Emperor Theodosius issued an edict closing all pagan temples. The Great Serapeum in Alexandria was destroyed by a Christian mob. One by one, the ancient temples of Egypt, which had been centers of learning, culture, and worship for millennia, were shut down, abandoned, or converted into churches. The last bastion of the old faith held out on the remote island of Philae in southern Egypt. Here, in the beautiful temple of Isis, a small community of priests continued the ancient rites, defying the imperial edicts, but their time was running out. In the year 394 CE, a priest carved the last known hieroglyphic inscription, a prayer to a local Nubian god. Sometime in the 6th century, the temple was finally closed by the armies of the Emperor Justinian. The eternal flame of the old religion was extinguished. With the closing of the temples, the schools that taught the complex art of hieroglyphic writing vanished. The knowledge was lost. For over 1,300 years, the voices of ancient Egypt fell silent. The civilization that had recorded its history so meticulously became a land of mute monuments and indecipherable symbols. Its wisdom, its stories, its very identity were locked away behind a veil of mystery. The world did not forget Egypt, but it no longer understood it. It became a land of fantasy, believed to hold the secrets of alchemy and magic. It was not until 1798, when Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt, that the process of rediscovery began. He brought with him an army of scholars, scientists, and artists to document the country's wonders. Their work sparked a wave of Egyptomania across Europe. A year later, a French soldier working on fortifications near the town of Rashid or Rosetta found a black stone slab. It would prove to be the key to unlocking the entire lost civilization. The Rosetta Stone was inscribed with the same decree in 3 different scripts: the sacred hieroglyphs at the top, the everyday demotic script of late Egypt in the middle, and, crucially, ancient Greek at the bottom. For the first time, scholars had a path, a dictionary to translate the lost language. The race to decipher the script was on. The man who would win it was a brilliant and obsessed French linguist named Jean-Francois Champollion. He realized that the hieroglyphs were not just simple picture writing, but a complex system combining phonetic sounds, ideograms, and determinatives. In 1822, after years of painstaking work, he made the final breakthrough, successfully reading the name of a pharaoh from the cartouche. Legend has it, he ran to his brother's office, cried, "Cheetons l'affaire, I've got it," and promptly fainted, exhausted by his discovery. The silence was broken. The voices of the pharaohs could be heard once more. This is the ultimate legacy of Egyptian mythology. Unlike the myths of the Greeks or the Norse, which survive almost entirely in texts written down long after their cultures had faded, the beliefs of Egypt are physically inscribed upon the land itself. The pyramids are not just tombs. They are stone arguments for a celestial afterlife. The temples are not just ruins. They are cosmic engines built to sustain Ma'at. The tombs are not just graves. They are sacred books, guides to eternity, painted directly onto the walls of the underworld. This unparalleled physical link provides a tangible, unbreakable connection to the past. To walk through Karnak, is to walk through the mind of an imperial priesthood. To stand before the Great Pyramid is to feel the weight of a civilization's obsession with eternity. To enter a tomb in the Valley of the Kings is to stand face to face with the people's profound hope for victory over death. Their world of gods and monsters, of cosmic order and personal salvation, is not just a story we can read. It is a world we can still, in some small way, inhabit. A world that, after thousands of years, has not entirely passed away.